tell you before we get to our muncha. We have a different friend to help us tell that story. Now, there's a story about this story. See, one day, I was looking through my book of Grimm fairy tales, and the Grimm brothers are the people who wrote down all those good fairy tales that we know. So I was looking through my book and reading some of the fairy tales, and I read this one fairy tale that had a character in it who had a long, made-up, important-sounding name. And that's just what it said in the book. It didn't say what his name was. It just said it was long and made-up and important-sounding. And see, when I read that, it reminded me about my baby brother Nicholas. My baby brother Nicholas is 6 years old now, but when he was younger, he used to like to add things to the middle of his name to make himself sound more important. So, like, his favorite toy was his truck that he named Mr. Truck. So sometimes if you asked him what his name was, he might say his name was Nicholas Mr. Truck Mazavero. And his favorite superhero still is Spider-Man. And so sometimes if you asked him what his name was, he might tell you his name was Nicholas Spider-Man Mazavero. And sometimes if he wanted to be really big and important sounding, he might add lots and lots of things into the middle of his name. So I decided he was just like the character in the story. And I decided that he needed to be in the story. So this story is Nicholas's Puss in Boots. So, once there was a miller, and he had 3 sons, and a mill, and a donkey, and a cat. The mill had to grind the grain, the donkey had to carry the grain, and the cat had to catch mice. When the miller died, his property was divided between his 3 sons. The oldest son got the mill, the middle son got the donkey, and the youngest son, that was Nicholas, got the cat. Well, Nicholas got to feeling pretty sorry for himself. He said, my oldest brother, he can still grind the grain, and my middle brother, he can ride the donkey. But all I've got is this cat, and once I skin him to make gloves, I won't have hardly anything. Well, that cat stood up, and he started talking back to Nicholas. He said, hold on there. There's more than one way to skin a cat, but the cat doesn't like any of them. He said, look, if you leave me alone, I can help you out. I can help you earn your fortune. Nicholas thought about it, and he said, okay, if I'm going to be working with you, I need to know what your name is. And the cat just looked at him, and he said, Nicholas, don't you remember when you were a little boy, you named me? And Nicholas was ashamed to say that he could not remember what he named me. So finally the cat told him, my name is Fluffy. And Nicholas tried not to laugh because he was the one who named the cat. So he said, okay, Fluffy, what is it that you propose that we do? And Fluffy said, okay, well, I can learn some things if I go out and walk amongst the people, but if I'm going to walk amongst the people, I need some good boots. So Nicholas took the only money he had left and he went to the cobbler and had him make some little boots for his cat. And he brought them back to Fluffy. And Fluffy just put those boots on. And the next day, he went out and he walked amongst the people. And when he was out walking amongst the people in his boots, he learned something very important. The king of that area loved to eat partridges. But partridges were very hard to catch. And so he hadn't eaten any partridges in a long, long time. So Fluffy decided that he was going to catch some partridges. Now you would think that since he was a cat and he was trying to catch birds, that what he would do is he would just kind of hide behind a bush and crouch down real low and watch the birds and then shake his butt and then jump on them. Right? That's how cats catch things. But that's not what Fluffy did. That's not what he did. He got a sack and some string and some birdseed and he went out in the woods. And he left the sack on the ground open. And he put some birdseed on the ground and he put some birdseed in the sack. And he tied the strings to the opening of the sack, and then he hid in the bushes and he held on to the other end of that string. So some partridges came and they ate the birdseed on the ground, and then they followed it on into the sack and they hopped in the sack. When he had 10 partridges inside the sack, he yanked on the string to close the opening. And then he tied it up and he threw that sack over his back and he walked right up to the palace. He knocked on the door, and when one of the king's servants answered, he said, I have some partridges for the king. And everyone knew how much the king loved partridges. So he took Fluffy right in to see the king. So when Fluffy was in front of the king, he took that sack of partridges and he threw it at the truck, must the Pharaoh. And the king was really impressed. This Count Nicholas sounded like a very important person, and he had given him partridges, which the king loved. So he took a sack full of gold coins, and he threw that at Fluffy's feet. He said, take this back to your master. So Fluffy threw that sack of gold coins over his back, and he walked home to Nicholas, threw that sack of gold coins at Nicholas's feet, and he said, you know, we can live comfortably for the rest of our lives off of this. But I believe I'll go out again tomorrow. So the next day, Fluffy went out again, and he caught more partridges, and he took those to the king, and he did that every day, until he was so well known around the palace, and he was so well liked that he was allowed to come and go as he pleased. So one day, he was sitting in the kitchen talking to the cook. He had his booted feet propped up on a barrel. Well, he heard out in the hallway, he heard one of the king's servants talking to the king's driver. That's the guy who drives the carriage for the king. He heard the servant telling the driver that the next day the king and the princess wanted to go for a ride across the river. So Fluffy went home that night and he told Nicholas, tomorrow, you're going swimming. So the next day, Fluffy and Nicholas went down to the river, and Nicholas took all of his clothes off and got in the river to swim. Well, Fluffy took all of Nicholas's clothes and he threw them away. Then he went and he stood out in the middle of the road. So when the king's carriage came up, Fluffy started jumping around and waving his paws. He said, stop! Help! Help! My master, Count Nicholas, the great, the brave, the really, really incredibly handsome Spider-Man Mr. Truck, the Pharaoh is stuck in the river. He went swimming and bandits stole his clothing, and he will surely freeze if we don't help him. And the king was horrified. He really appreciated all that Count Nicholas had done for him, and so he sent his driver right